Let's go back in time. Imagine it's 1993. You're a 10-year-old gamer. This was before Call of Duty and the rise of gamers, so people thought you were a nerd. It didn't matter to you though. You had your NES, your brand spanking new SNES. Maybe you played Super Castlevania 4, owner of one of the greatest soundtracks of all time. Yeah, look at this whip. You loved your Super Mario Brothers and Final Fight, but there was another side to you, a horror side. Your favorite movie was David Cronenberg's The Fly. Your mom didn't know you watched it at your best friend's house. She didn't understand your newfound fear of Jeff Goldblum. You had a rolled up poster of Hellraiser you bought at school for $3 under your bed. You knew if your dad saw it, he'd call the cops or they'd take you away somewhere for liking such things. I mean, imagine hanging this thing up in your room. It doesn't get more metal than this. You read the madman writer Stephen King's novels when they released each year, which in '92 was... I have to do some digging here, the guy's been writing nonstop since birth. Dolores Claiborne. Guess I have to check that out. You loved horror. You wondered why there wasn't more blood and guts in your games. Everything was always so colorful and not in the bloody sense. You'd heard rumors of a game called Splatterhouse, but even if you'd owned a TurboGrafx-16, your parents wouldn't let you rent a game with a cover like this. But then, you visit your cousin or uncle's house for a few days, and they have this monstrosity, and they play games on it. He doesn't follow the rules laid out by your parents. He's a bad dude. He has the Hellraiser poster up in his room above his computer, after you and him watch Dead Space. No, not that Dead Space. This Dead Space.
Frank, what's happening?
He tells you he has a game to show you. And that game? This game. Alone in the Dark. Later it will be called the grandfather of survival horror. But you don't know that. You just know it starts like this. And this. And when you're sitting there in the dark, you hear someone reading like this.
I plunged my hand into the soil and felt that repulsive thing which was trying to catch me.
Yeah, this is magic. Your hands shake because you ran out of ammo, because you have nothing but a sword to fight off these zombies. Or, that doesn't happen. You hear about Alone in the Dark when consoles are in their 9th generation. You think, I guess I should go check out this series that they call the grandfather survival horror. I love survival horror. I mean, I even like Deadly Premonition.
1 turkey, strawberry jam, and cereal sandwich.
Sounds like the sinner's sandwich.
But when you boot up the game, you're greeted with this. This was good in 1992? Well, yeah, this hadn't been done before. I mean, 3 years earlier, Minesweeper was released. This wasn't the gaming era of today. This is before we were flooded with Resident Evils and Silent Hills and their spin-offs. This was before devs thought about things like, oh, I hope my player doesn't get stuck here, or, oh, we should probably put some shotgun ammo here in case the player doesn't have any. No, this was the era of cruelty. This was the era of make them earn every scene. This is what the Alone in the Dark dev, Frederick Reynal, had to say about the kind of game this is. A game is 80% movement. This is where you want the player to be scared when doing these simple things. In Alone, when he first opens his first door, there's a monster right behind it and he immediately dies. When he walks down his first corridor, the floorboards collapse and he kills himself. From that moment, he will be scared all the time. So, what's going on here? How did we get from this
Tibi magnum inomenandum signa stellarum nigrarum et
to this? Right from the start, we get some strong gothic vibes. We've got a spooky house with an old relative. This makes me think of 19th century ghost stories, like something Edgar Allan Poe or Henry James would write. But these aren't Poe enemies. What is that? There's this weird thing with old games where the monsters are just random monsters thrown together, rather than monsters based around a theme. Even Resident Evil was guilty of just throwing weird enemies at the player that didn't fit with the theme of the game. It wasn't until Silent Hill that we started to get monsters whose design had some kind of unity. That kind of thematic unity is common nowadays in games, so much so that we don't even really think about it when it's there. Back in '92, I don't think explaining the reason for all these random monsters was necessary. Probably the biggest horror franchise that existed was Castlevania, and that was an homage to 50s and 60s horror. Hitoshi Akamatsu, the director of the first 3 Castlevanias, said it himself. Being aware of horror movies from long ago, I wanted players to feel like they were in a classic horror movie. I mean, Castlevania had Dracula and the Mummy and Creepy Fishman. Alone in the Dark is something different though. It's based on horror older than film. It's based on books, those dusty things that no one reads anymore. Things written before my great-grandparents were born, and I'm basically a dinosaur. The story in Alone in the Dark is told through found documents. That's called epistolary form. Story through found letters or diary entries or emails or blogs. If you've ever read Dracula, that's told in epistolary form as well. Horror through found media has a bit of a surge recently. VHS horror is all the rage now. Imagine the appeal of a story told exclusively through found VHS tapes. I mean, the game probably exists. Anyway, in Alone in the Dark, we get all these letters which have amazing voice acting.
The Creatures of Night by Hubertus the Bald.
All of the letters I've found are voice acted, even this one that kills you instantly.
Tibi magnum inominandum signa stellarum nigrarum et.
Yeah, that's a thing. Alone in the Dark takes place in the 1920s or 1930s. You play as one of 2 characters, both who end up at the Dercerto house to investigate a piano. Hey, does anyone know any other survival horror series where you can play as 2 characters? I can't think of a single one. So both of these characters have a kind of trope reason for going to the Dercerto house. Emily goes because she believes there's some mystery to solve regarding the death of her late uncle, the previous owner of the house. It has something to do with the piano. We don't know much about her, but her voice gives me strong Southern rich lady vibes.
The attorney's letter came as a deep shock to me. My Uncle Jeremy had died by his own hand.
I mean, if her uncle owns a house this size, she's gotta be rich, right? Emily was probably going to New Orleans clubs, listening to Jelly Roll Morton play jazz, doing the foxtrot, and sipping old fashions between songs. Edward Carnby, the other protagonist, goes there as a part of a private investigation to find said piano.
On my door, a dull brass plate says, Private Detective. The few friends I have call me Carnby. The others call me the Reptile.
He's one of those hard-boiled, no-nonsense types that you'd see in noir books and films, back in the days of Raymond Chandler and the Maltese Falcon. Private eyes who couldn't stop smoking, who were sexy but didn't have no time for no woman. Both characters go through the same story and never cross paths. They each start at the top of the house and go down and down and down until they're below the house in some caverns. The story is entertaining, but the lore is a bit confused. On one hand, Alone in the Dark seems like a straight gothic horror tale with maybe ghosts and secret deals with Lucifer. Spoiler, we'll see that later.
Now give me my stone!
I don't have your stone, and fuck you anyway!
But some of these documents reference Lovecraft lore. I was expecting more tentacles as we unraveled the story, but the story doesn't really go in that direction. See, this is a haunted house story, a kind of Amityville horror place. On the piano, after you've died a few times, you find Jeremy Hartwood's death note. Hartwood was Emily's uncle and the previous owner of the home. It's revealed that he was haunted by a dark man. That dark man turns out to be Elijah Pickford, also known as the pirate Ezekiel Pregst, who bought the land, built the mansion, and did some occult things in the caverns below the mansion to extend his life. In a weird twist of fate, Pickford was killed by a Union soldier during the Civil War. His ghost floated around and possessed a tree under the house. Hartwood, Ah, I get it. Anyway, Pitchford looked for a body to take over. Jeremy Hartwood was his target, and because Hartwood game-ended himself, our player character becomes his target. That's basically the whole plot. After you go down to the cavern and run from this thing, you end up finding the evil pirate tree guy and making him a forest fire, ending the curse. The real journey, though, is the player's own. The trial and error of figuring out how to get from one screen to the next without dying. The constant fear of, what the hell is going to kill me next? This horror gaming philosophy changed in years after this, where developers tried to balance scaring you without killing you too much. There's this question I had though, why are these Lovecraft references put in the game? The narrative in the game seems stronger without the Lovecraft elements. Just make it a pirate occult story. Then I learned that during the development of this game, Infogrames acquired a license to the Call of Cthulhu RPG, which gave them access to Lovecraftian lore. Some of the monsters were replaced by Lovecraftian versions, with a few exceptions that Raynal fought for. But this isn't a Call of Cthulhu game. The Call of Cthulhu owners, Chaosium, took a look at this game and said, no, I don't think this works for us. So those last months of development must have been a kind of push and pull between the Cthulhu lore and the occult pirate stuff that was originally in it. I think the half-implemented Cthulhu stuff makes the game a bit weaker. But hey, it's 1992. They were doing things people hadn't done before. It's okay. So after Alone in the Dark came out, it was followed by a few sequels. Alone in the Dark 2 and 3 are very similar to Alone in the Dark 1. I think they're all on the same engine, but then there was a long hiatus. There was a 2001 reboot much in the spirit of Resident Evil. Perhaps we'll talk about that game someday. But today, today, we're talking about this disaster piece from 2008. This beautiful train wreck of a game.
We should find Jack. He's one of the hotel's watchmen. He'll know what to do.
Rarely does a game manage to try so many new things and fail miserably at all of them. We've got this mechanic where you use the control stick to swing a weapon, which isn't that bad, but melee weapons are pretty much useless unless they're on fire, which you also have to do by way of control stick, and which means you have to manage to hit the enemies before your fire stick burns your hands. Look at this inventory system. This is pretty cool, but I don't know if it pauses the game. Like, I've beat the game, but looking at my inventory only seemed to pause the enemies about 50% of the time. And we've got to mention the blinking mechanic, which is an idea. There's all these bells and whistles to the game, but the core game, which I'm not even sure what the core game is, fails. This is mostly a puzzle game, but there's action. Not good action, but action nonetheless. Then there's this story. Oh boy. We've got our protagonist here. Does he look familiar? Yeah, not at all. That's old Edward Carnby from the first game. What's he doing in this modern day world? Well, he's lost his memory, so our guess is as good as his. And we're being led up to a rooftop for an execution because shooting a gun from the rooftop of a downtown high-rise is the best place to do it. Of course we don't die. This dark force starts ripping up everything. Then the game really begins, and you see most of its tricks, which involve awful controls and RNG game physics that will just kill you. We see this cutscene of all these old white dudes talking about things we don't understand yet. Okay, this necklace is going to be very important. The guy who's wearing it is named Theophile, which is pretty on the nose for a name. Theo means religion, Phile means lover. This game is about as subtle as a jackhammer. We get a bit of an important cutscene here.
What are you talking about?
You forgot. But not to worry. I still have the keys to your mind. Now give me my stone.
I don't have your stone, and fuck you anyway.
Yeah, tell him, Carnby. This makes me think that Carnby's exorcism is the cause of all this mayhem. Later we end up meeting Sarah Flores by happenstance in an elevator. Flores is the Spanish word for flower. So like Rose and Alan Wake, Sarah represents a kind of purity since flowers are pure things.
Don't try to take advantage of the situation.
Don't flatter yourself.
Oh my god. Let's talk about the protagonist's name for a second. Carnby is the name of a character in a Clark Ashton Smith story. Smith's Carnby was hired to translate the Necronomicon. Clark Ashton Smith lived and wrote in the same time as Lovecraft back in the 1920s. I haven't read his work, but by the look at the titles and the magazines he was in, he wrote horror in the same vein as Lovecraft. Just listen to the name of some of these short stories and tell me what you imagine. The Abominations of Yondo, The Empires of the Necromancers, Murder in the Fourth Dimension, The Vaults of Yalvombis. I bet they're all better than this game's story, which is about as bland as you can get for 2008. It's becoming increasingly hard to pull off the amnesia plot in a game narrative. In one sense it works because the player is on the same footing as the character, but the desire to learn who you are has to be really strong to pull the player into the narrative. In the movie Memento by Christopher Nolan, you've got a protagonist who leaves messages to himself on his skin, and the story is told out of order, much like how the protagonist would see the world. That's two huge hooks for the viewer. What's the hook here? Blinking? We've got a generic super athletic white dude with a cool scar. He isn't even given much time for one-liners, which is a shame as I laughed out loud a few times at his dialogue.
1924. Disappeared under strange circumstances in 1938. What the fuck?
Oh my god, James McCaffrey. His voice acting is the best part of this game. So we're running around with Sarah and we meet Theophile. I still can't believe they named him that. And he tells us the name of the villain, Crowley. Based on Aleister Crowley, of course, perhaps the most famous occultist of the 20th century. Crowley was deemed the wickedest man in the world. He claimed that the Egyptian god Horus spoke to him while he was in Egypt and believed the consumption of bodily fluids to be a sacred act. Anyway, this Crowley's not nearly as interesting as that Crowley. This Crowley's looking for the path of light, whatever that is, and Edward has to beat him to it. Cut to the worst driving sequence in any game ever. You like not knowing where to go? Check. You like random car physics that will lead to a game over? Check. You like your car with handling worse than a flat-tired dump truck? We've got you covered. After that, Theo tells us more about the story, then turns the gun on himself to keep himself from being possessed. But it doesn't matter much because Theo's ghost will guide us later, which is a kind of missed opportunity. Don't bring him back. Having the one guy who knows what's going on disappear is a great way to raise the stakes. Before he dies, Theo tells us to go to Central Park and find room 943 in a museum. We fight this boss and get this confusing bit of dialogue.
For you, there will be no mercy.
I'm not asking for mercy.
So you assume responsibility for the blood you've shed.
I thought this darkness wanted blood to be shed. This makes less sense than the show Lost. After that boss, which took me entirely too long to beat, we get this hilarious gameplay where you have to get the hand scanner to activate, and the guard is the only one who can access it, but he's dead. So what do?
We need the guard's fingerprint.
No good, he's dead.
Then he won't mind you borrowing his keys, will he?
Ah, Jesus, Sarah. You're getting worse than me.
At the museum in room 943, Theo's ghost explains that the stone, the one we kept seeing that we have now, the Philosopher's Stone, contained Lucifer, aka the Devil, and was released by Crowley. Lucifer wants us to use the stone to release him. I guess that's why all this darkness is attacking? I've got to be honest, the story is vanilla and filled with so much go from A to B to C that it's kinda hard to follow. Also, why are there no subtitles? It's 2008. Every game should have had subtitles by this point. We have this confrontation with Crowley on a helicopter.
I've grown tired of chasing you, Carnby. You should have been dead long ago. Sorry, punctuality is one of my strengths. Give it to me, please.
Top shelf dialogue.
If the stone is cursed, why do you want it? What about the path of light? The stone deserves better than that ridiculous prophecy. Happy endings are for fools. To hell with mankind. I was born to carry that stone.
So the prophecy is bunk, but you were born to carry the stone? Logically, that checks out. We end up meeting Hermes, who we've heard nothing about, but he holds the other part of the Philosopher's Stone. We're late in the game, folks, and we just met a character we've heard nothing about. That's not a good sign for a game or movie. So Hermes and Edward rush back to the museum because, of course they do. They only have a few minutes, which is explained by hand-waving.
As soon as I completed the lock, some sort of countdown started. Theo's notes say there's no way to stop it. You've got to bring back the key before it runs out.
You get this part where you have to save Sarah from Crowley. It does not go well for Crowley. Why is the door to Lucifer under Central Park? Wouldn't somewhere like Egypt or Israel make more sense? What's in New York that could be so bad? Oh, never mind. Hermes and Edward put their stones together, and then Lucifer comes out and gets into Sarah. We're faced with a choice of saving or killing Sarah. I was so fed up with the game that there was only one thing that I could do.
Kill her or let her live. You alone can decide, and you will decide for all.
After that, we get this, which is one of the better parts of the game.
The last free act of man was murder.
So was his first free act.
If you save her, she becomes Lucifer and Ed just nopes out of the scene. Rather than ask, was this good? Which is an easy no. Instead, we should ask, how could the story have been better? Well, Carnby could have had some kind of traitor gimmick that he does all the time. Like, imagine that he chews gum, and a few times throughout the game he goes out of his way to get gum. Imagine that when Carnby and Hermes are in that truck together, that first Carnby has to get gum out of the glove compartment before he can save the world. Little traits like this go a long way in making a character interesting. Speaking of interesting, why is poor Sarah just a cutout? What would have been fun is if she had a religious background or maybe even religious trauma. Something to build up her getting possessed at the end of the game. And Lucifer as the demon. Satan, the big dog. I mean, that's so over the top that it's hard to take seriously. A lesser known demon would have been so much better. Writers can make up their own lore for a lesser known demon. Their hands are tied with Satan. Everyone knows Satan. Ultimately though, this is a video game and it fails at the #1 rule of a video game, which is that it needs to be fun to play. And this is not. I couldn't find out much about the development of this game except that there were a bunch of tech demos. The devs were really proud of all the object physics in this game, and rightly so. The physics are cool, but how they are implemented does not make for a fun game. And maybe that's where the story went wrong as well. Good ideas can only get you so far. You've got to polish and refine them into something good. So which game is better? Which game had a better narrative? 92, baby. Get out your power gloves and baseball cards. Put up your Michael Jordan poster and sip on your ecto cooler. The narrative is miles better in the 1992 game. The gameplay is somehow better in the 1992 game. I will take this rifle over this pistol any day. I will take instant deaths over whatever this is in the final chapter of the 2008 game where I spent 5 hours driving around doing a destroy the base quest, or these physics puzzles that require perfect physics luck to get to work. This is, I think, unknowingly the best way to sum up the Alone in the Dark series.
God, who the hell am I?
It has little identity besides Carnby going on quests. In 1992, we had the ghost story / Lovecraft background. Then in the 2008 game, we're fighting Lucifer. In the 2008 game, our character even has some kind of special power. This series has a lot in common with horror movie franchises, in that with each new entry in the series, the games get worse and worse and worse. There's a movie too. 2 movies actually. The first one was directed by Uwe Boll, who has a track record of doing awesome movies. I haven't seen them yet. The 2014 entry Alone in the Dark Illumination, I haven't played that one yet. Maybe that will be a future video. I've read it's the worst of the bunch. Alone in the Dark 2008 score on Metacritic is a whopping 55, while Illumination's score is a 19. I don't know if I'm ready to put myself through that kind of pain yet.
Do it.
Okay, maybe, but I won't enjoy it.
Give it to me! Please!